A single father working as a janitor saves the life of the ruthless billionaire CEO who publicly humiliated him hours earlier, then watches her luxury SUV explode in flames behind them. Now she's standing in his tiny apartment, stripped of her power, forced to face the man she degraded, and the daughter he's sacrificing everything to raise. She thought she understood strength. She was wrong. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this journey reaches across the world. The fluorescent lights in the Devos Tower parking garage buzzed like dying insects at 5:47 a.m. Logan Pierce pushed his janitorial cart across the oil-stained concrete, the wheels squeaking in rhythm with his footsteps. 32 years old, broad-shouldered from his military days, but worn down in ways that didn't show on the surface. His navy blue uniform hung a little loose. He'd lost weight in the past year, though he couldn't say when exactly that had happened. He stopped at the employee entrance, swiped his badge, and waited for the beep that would let him into another 14-hour shift. The beep didn't come. He swiped again. Nothing. "Come on," he muttered, checking the time on his watch. Ava's daycare opened at 6:30, which meant he had exactly 43 minutes to get upstairs, prep the executive floor, and get back out before the morning traffic turned his commute into a nightmare. He swiped a third time. The light blinked red. The door swung open from the inside. Marcus, one of the older security guards, stood there with a coffee in one hand and a knowing look on his face. "Badge reader's been broken since Tuesday," Marcus said, holding the door. "They're waiting on parts. Been letting people through manually." Logan nodded his thanks and stepped inside. The hallway smelled like industrial cleaner and burnt coffee. His cart rattled as he maneuvered it toward the service elevator. "You look like hell, Pierce," Marcus called after him. "Yeah, well, hell's got a wait list these days." Marcus chuckled, but there wasn't much humor in it. They both knew what working at Devos meant for people like them. You showed up, you kept your head down, and you hoped the higher-ups didn't notice you long enough for your paycheck to clear. The service elevator opened with a metallic groan. Logan stepped inside, pressed the button for the 43rd floor, and leaned against the wall as the doors slid shut. His reflection stared back at him from the polished steel, dark circles under his eyes, stubble he hadn't bothered to shave, a small cut on his jaw from where Ava had accidentally elbowed him that morning when she climbed into his bed at 4 a.m. because of a nightmare. He rubbed his face and tried to remember the last time he'd slept more than 5 hours straight. The elevator climbed. 30 floors. 35. 40. When the doors opened, Logan stepped into a different world. The executive floor was all glass and chrome, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. The carpets were thick enough to swallow sound. The air smelled like expensive leather and something floral he couldn't name. Everything here was designed to remind you that this was where power lived. Logan wasn't supposed to be here during business hours. His job was to clean after everyone left, empty the trash, vacuum the carpets, wipe down the glass conference tables. But today was different. Today, they were hosting some kind of emergency board meeting, which meant he had to prep the main boardroom before 7. He moved quickly, pulling supplies from his cart, polished the table until it gleamed, refilled the water pitchers, made sure the chairs were perfectly aligned. He checked his watch. 6:14. Good. He could still make it. He was wheeling his cart back toward the elevator when he heard voices coming down the hall. "Don't care what the projections say, Richard. Don't care what We're hemorrhaging resources on divisions that don't deliver. Cut them." Logan froze. That voice. He'd heard it before, echoing through these halls like a judge handing down sentences. Cold. Sharp. Absolute. Victoria Hale, CEO. 30 years old. Billionaires. The woman whose face graced business magazines under headlines like The Ice Queen of Tech and Youngest Self-Made Female CEO Rewrites the Playbook. Logan had never spoken to her directly. He'd seen her in passing, usually surrounded by assistants and executives, always moving like she had somewhere more important to be. Which, he supposed, she did. He turned his cart toward the service corridor, hoping to slip away before, "You there! Stop!" Logan's hands tightened on the cart handle. He turned. Victoria Hale stood 15 feet away, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than his car. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail. Her eyes, pale gray, almost colorless, locked onto him like a targeting system. Behind her, a man in his 50s with silver hair and an expensive watch tried to keep up. Richard something, CFO, maybe. Logan didn't keep track. "Yes, ma'am?" Logan said. Victoria walked toward him, heels clicking against the floor. "The boardroom. Is it ready?" "Yes, ma'am." "Just finished." She glanced at her watch. "You're still here." It wasn't a question. It was an observation, a critique. "I was just leaving," Logan said. "See that you do." She turned away, already dismissing him. "Richard, I want the full breakdown on the manufacturing side. If they can't—" She stopped mid-sentence. Logan followed her gaze. On his cart, wedged between bottles of glass cleaner and a box of trash bags, was a small stuffed rabbit. Pink, slightly worn, with one ear that flopped to the side. Ava's rabbit. She must have stuffed it in his bag that morning when he wasn't looking. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Is that a toy?" Logan felt his face heat. "My daughter's. She must have... This is a corporate headquarters," Victoria said, her voice colder now. "Not a daycare. Control your personal effects or leave them at home." "Yes, ma'am." She turned again. But Richard was standing too close, and as she pivoted, her elbow knocked into the coffee cup sitting on the edge of Logan's cart. The cup tipped. Logan lunged for it, but he was too slow. Coffee, still hot, still full, splashed across the front of Victoria's suit jacket and down onto her white blouse. The hallway went silent. Victoria stood perfectly still, staring down at the dark stain spreading across her chest. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes lifted to Logan, and in them, he saw something that made his stomach drop. Not anger. Anger would have been easier. This was contempt. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. You," she said quietly, her voice like ice cracking, "are a janitor." Logan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "You exist in this building to clean up after people who actually matter," Victoria continued, her voice low enough that Richard had to lean in to hear. "You don't belong on this floor during business hours. You don't bring your personal life into this space. And you certainly don't compromise my schedule because you're too incompetent to manage a cart." Logan's hands curled into fists at his sides. "It was an accident." "An accident," Victoria repeated. "Is that what you'll tell the board when they ask why their CEO showed up to a meeting looking like she just survived a food fight? I'll get you a towel, Eat. Don't!" She held up one hand. "Just go. Now, before you do any more damage." Richard shifted uncomfortably. "Victoria, maybe—" "Not now, Richard." She turned to him, her voice sharp. "Get me a change of clothes from my office, and make sure security logs this. I want a report on why maintenance staff are operating outside their assigned hours." Logan felt his pulse hammering in his ears. His daughter's face flashed in his mind. Ava, sitting at the daycare table, waiting for him to pick her up. Ava, who needed dinner and help with her homework, and someone to read her a bedtime story. He couldn't afford to lose this job. "I'm sorry," he said again, quieter this time. Victoria didn't even look at him. "You're dismissed." Logan turned and pushed his cart toward the elevator. His face burned, his hands shook. Behind him, he could hear Victoria's heels clicking away, her voice already back on the phone, already moving past him like he was a stain she'd had cleaned up. The elevator doors closed. Logan stood alone, staring at his reflection again. The man staring back looked tired, beaten, small. He reached into the cart and pulled out Ava's stuffed rabbit, holding it in both hands. The fabric was soft, worn from years of being dragged to bed, to school, to every place she needed something familiar to hold on to. He thought about what Victoria had said. "You're a janitor. You'll never rise above this." And the worst part? She was probably right. Whoosh. Well? Logan made it to Ava's daycare with 3 minutes to spare. The building was a low, cheerful place with bright murals painted on the walls and a playground out back that had seen better days. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe, and the staff loved Ava, which was all that mattered. He pulled into the parking lot, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle over him. His shirt still smelled faintly like coffee. His jaw ached from clenching it the entire drive over. He couldn't stop replaying the scene in his head. The way Victoria had looked at him, the way her voice had cut through him like he was nothing. You're a janitor. He knew that. He'd known it every day for the past 3 years. Ever since he'd left his engineering career behind to take whatever work he could find that offered flexibility and didn't require a security clearance he no longer had. But hearing someone say it like that, like it defined everything he was, everything he'd ever be, it hollowed him out in a way he wasn't ready for. He shook his head and stepped out of the car. Inside, the daycare smelled like crayons and macaroni and cheese. Kids were scattered across the playroom, some building block towers, others coloring at low tables. Ava sat near the window, her dark curls pulled into 2 lopsided pigtails, her face scrunched in concentration as she drew something with a purple crayon. She looked up as Logan walked in, and her entire face lit up. "Daddy!" She launched herself at him, and Logan caught her, lifting her into his arms even though his back protested. She wrapped her arms around his neck and squeezed, and for a moment, the weight of the morning lifted. "Hey, Bug," he said softly. "You have a good day?" "Uh-huh. We made paintings. Mine's a dinosaur. Want to see?" "Absolutely, I have." She wriggled out of his arms and ran back to the table, returning with a piece of construction paper covered in green and purple splatters that might have been a dinosaur if you squinted and had a good imagination. "It's perfect," Logan said, and he meant it. Miss Carla, one of the daycare workers, appeared at his elbow. She was a round woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a smile that made you feel like everything would be okay. "She was a little angel today," Carla said, "though she did ask me if dinosaurs could eat clouds." Logan smiled despite himself. "What'd you tell her?" "I told her I'd have to check with a scientist." Carla's smile faded slightly as she looked at him. "You okay, Logan? You look worn out." "Long day," he said. "But I'm good." "You sure? Because if you ever need—" "I'm good," he said again, a little firmer this time. He appreciated Carla's concern, but he didn't need pity. Pity didn't pay bills. Carla nodded, though she didn't look convinced. "Well, you take care of yourself, okay? Ava needs you healthy." "I will." He took Ava's hand and led her out to the car. She chattered the entire way home, telling him about the other kids and the story Miss Carla had read and how she'd shared her snack with a boy who forgot his. Logan listened, responding when he needed to, but his mind kept drifting back to the tower, to Victoria Hale's voice, to the look in her eyes. By the time they got home, the sun was starting to set. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had probably been nice in the 1980s, but had since given up on maintaining appearances. The paint was peeling, the stairs creaked, the lock on their door stuck half the time. But it was home. Logan unlocked the door and let Ava inside. She immediately kicked off her shoes and ran to the couch, grabbing the remote. "Can I watch cartoons?" "Homework first," Logan said. "But Daddy, homework, then cartoons." She pouted, but pulled out her backpack and spread her papers across the coffee table. Logan moved into the kitchen, opening the fridge and scanning its contents. A carton of eggs, half a loaf of bread, some leftover spaghetti from 2 nights ago. He pulled out the spaghetti and started reheating it on the stove. Ava called out questions from the living room. "What's 8 plus 5? How do you spell banana?" "Why do worms live in dirt?" And Logan answered each one, stirring the pasta absently. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a text from an unknown number. "Disciplinary hearing scheduled for Friday, 9 a.m. Attendance mandatory." His stomach dropped. He read the message again, then shoved the phone back into his pocket. Of course. Of course Victoria hadn't let it go. She was going to make an example out of him. "Daddy?" Ava's voice pulled him back. "Is dinner ready?" Logan forced a smile. "Almost, Bug. Just a few more minutes." He served the spaghetti, sat down across from Ava at their tiny table, and watched her twirl noodles onto her fork. She hummed while she ate, swinging her legs under the chair. She was happy, safe, fed. That was all that mattered, even if it meant swallowing his pride, even if it meant standing in front of a panel on Friday and apologizing for something that wasn't entirely his fault, even if it meant taking whatever punishment they handed down and smiling through it, because Ava needed him, and he'd be damned if he let her down. The storm started just after midnight. Logan woke to the sound of rain hammering against the windows, wind howling through the gaps in the frame. He lay there for a moment listening, then glanced at the clock. 12:47 a.m. He should have been asleep. He had to be up in 4 hours. Instead, he stared at the ceiling, his mind circling the same thoughts over and over. The hearing, the bills, the look in Victoria Hale's eyes. He finally gave up on sleep around 2 a.m. and moved to the kitchen, making himself a cup of instant coffee and sitting at the table with his laptop. He pulled up his bank account and stared at the numbers. Rent was due in 6 days. Ava's daycare bill was overdue by a week. His car insurance was coming up at the end of the month. If he lost this job, he closed the laptop. He wouldn't lose it. He couldn't. The storm raged outside, shaking the windows, and Logan sat in the dark, drinking bad coffee and trying not to think about how close everything was to falling apart. Friday morning arrived gray and heavy. Logan dropped Ava off at daycare, kissed her forehead, and told her he'd pick her up early. How early? She asked. Lunchtime, maybe. Her eyes widened. Really? Really? She grinned and ran inside, and Logan stood there watching her go, memorizing the way she looked when she was happy. Then he got in his car and drove to the tower. The hearing was held in a small conference room on the 37th floor. Logan sat across from 3 people he didn't know, 2 HR representatives and someone from legal. They asked him questions in flat clinical tones. What happened? Why he was on the executive floor? Whether he understood company policy regarding work hours? Logan answered honestly. He apologized. He explained. They listened without expression. At the end of 30 minutes, the woman from legal told him they'd send him their decision by end of business. Logan thanked them and left. He went back to work, cleaned the bathrooms on the 23rd floor, emptied trash bins, mopped floors. At 4 p.m., his phone buzzed. Final warning issued. Any further incidents will result in immediate termination. Logan read the message twice, then put his phone away and went back to work. He finished his shift at 6:30, picked up Ava, and drove home through streets still slick from the rain. That night, he made her macaroni and cheese from a box. She told him about a game she'd played at recess. He smiled and nodded and didn't tell her that his hands were shaking. After she went to bed, Logan sat on the couch and stared at the wall. He thought about Victoria Hale, sitting in her office somewhere high above the city, probably not even remembering his name. He thought about the rabbit on his cart, about Ava's smile, about the life he was barely holding together. And he made himself a promise. He'd survive this, whatever it took, because giving up wasn't an option. The next storm came 3 days later. Logan was driving home from his shift, exhausted, his mind half on the road and half on the grocery list he needed to tackle before picking up Ava. The rain started as a drizzle, then escalated fast, sheets of water slamming into the windshield, wind rocking the car. The highway was nearly empty. Smart people had stayed home. Logan wasn't smart. He was just tired. He was about to merge onto the exit ramp when he saw it. Headlights, twisted metal, smoke rising into the rain. A vehicle, overturned, halfway into the ditch on the side of the road. Logan's foot hit the brake without thinking. His car skidded slightly, hydroplaning for a second before the tires caught. He pulled onto the shoulder and threw the car into park. For a moment, he just sat there, staring through the rain-streaked windshield at the wreck. He should call 911, let someone else handle it. But even from here, he could see the flames starting to lick up from under the hood. Logan grabbed his phone, dialed 911, and shoved the door open. The rain hit him like a wall. He ran toward the wreck, his boots splashing through standing water. The closer he got, the clearer the picture became. It was an SUV. Expensive. Black. The front end crumpled. The driver's side window shattered. And inside, Logan's breath caught. A woman. Slumped against the steering wheel, blood on her forehead. He grabbed the door handle and pulled. Locked. "Hey!" he shouted, pounding on the window. "Can you hear me?" No response. The flames were growing. Smoke poured out from under the hood, thick and black. Logan looked around, found a rock half buried in the mud, and slammed it into the window. The glass spiderwebbed. He hit it again. Again. The window gave. He reached inside, unlocked the door, and yanked it open. The woman groaned, her head lolling to the side, and that's when Logan saw her face. Victoria Hale. His hands froze. For 1 second, just one, he thought about walking away. She wouldn't know. No one would. But then the flames roared louder, and his training kicked in. He unbuckled her seatbelt, hooked his arms under hers, and pulled her out of the vehicle. She was dead weight, unconscious, her breathing shallow. He dragged her across the mud, away from the wreck, his lungs burning. Behind him, the SUV groaned. Logan pulled harder, his boots slipping, rain blinding him. 20 feet, 30. The explosion came like thunder. The force of it knocked Logan forward, and he hit the ground hard, Victoria's body landing half on top of him. Heat washed over them, and Logan turned his head just in time to see the SUV engulfed in flames, the skeleton of it collapsing inward. He lay there, gasping, rain pouring down on both of them. Victoria coughed. Her eyes fluttered open, pale gray, unfocused. She stared at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, she had no words. The sirens came about 5 minutes later, cutting through the rain and the roar of the burning wreck. Logan was still on the ground, Victoria's weight pressing against his chest, both of them soaked to the bone. His ribs ached where he'd hit the pavement. His hands were scraped raw from dragging her across the gravel. Victoria's eyes had closed again. Her breathing was uneven, ragged. Blood still trickled from the cut on her forehead, mixing with the rain. Logan shifted carefully, trying to ease her off him without jostling her too much. "Hey," he said, his voice rough. "Stay with me. Help's coming." Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. The ambulance pulled up first, followed by 2 police cars and a fire truck. Paramedics rushed over, their voices clipped and professional as they assessed Victoria, checked her vitals, fitted a cervical collar around her neck. One of them, a younger guy with close-cropped hair, turned to Logan. "You pull her out?" Logan nodded. "She's lucky you were here. Another minute and—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They loaded Victoria onto a stretcher and into the ambulance. Logan stood there watching, water dripping from his hair, his shirt clinging to his skin. One of the cops approached him, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. "You're the one who called it in?" "Yeah." "Need a statement from you. You hurt?" "I'm fine." She looked him over, unconvinced, but pulled out a notebook. "Walk me through what happened." "Well, spot on my pocket," Logan told her. Saw the wreck, stopped, pulled the woman out, explosion. He kept it simple, factual. The cop wrote it all down, asked a few clarifying questions, then nodded. "You did good," she said. "Most people would have driven past." Logan didn't respond to that. He wasn't sure what to say. The truth was, he almost had. The cop handed him a card. "If we need anything else, we'll call. You should probably get checked out too. Adrenaline's masking a lot right now." "I'm fine," Logan said again. She gave him a look that said she'd heard that before and knew it was bullshit, but she let it go. "All right, drive safe." Logan walked back to his car, his legs heavy, his whole body starting to register the damage. He climbed into the driver's seat and just sat there for a moment, staring at the steering wheel. His hands were shaking, not from fear. He'd been through worse in the military, but from the sheer weight of what had just happened. Victoria Hale, the woman who'd humiliated him, the woman who'd nearly gotten him fired. He'd just saved her life. He started the engine and pulled back onto the highway. The rain was letting up now, tapering off into a steady drizzle. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. He glanced at it. A text from the daycare. "Ava's asking when you're picking her up. Everything okay?" Logan cursed under his breath. He'd completely lost track of time. He texted back quickly. "On my way. 10 minutes. He pressed harder on the gas. Ava was waiting by the window when he pulled up, her face pressed against the glass. The moment she saw his car, she bolted for the door. Miss Carla caught her by the shoulder, laughing, and walked her out. Logan stepped out of the car, and Carla's smile faltered. "Logan, what happened to you?" He glanced down at himself. His clothes were filthy, streaked with mud and soot. There was a tear in his sleeve he hadn't noticed. His hands were scraped and bruised. "Car accident," he said. "Not mine. I stopped to help." Carla's eyes widened. "Are you okay? Do you need—" "I'm fine. Just need to get home and clean up." Ava ran over and grabbed his hand, looking up at him with wide eyes. "Daddy, you're all dirty." "I know, Bug. I'll take a shower when we get home." Carla still looked worried, but she let it go. "You call if you need anything, okay?" "Will do." He buckled Ava into the back seat and drove home, listening to her chatter about her day. She'd made a new friend. They'd played tag at recess. Miss Carla had read them a story about a dragon. Logan responded when he needed to, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept seeing Victoria's face in the moment she'd opened her eyes. The confusion, the fear, the absence of that cold, cutting control she always carried. Back at the apartment, Logan peeled off his ruined clothes and stood under the shower until the water ran clear. His ribs were already bruising. His shoulder throbbed, but nothing was broken. He'd gotten off easy. He dressed in clean clothes, made Ava dinner, grilled cheese and tomato soup, and sat with her while she ate. She told him about the dragon in the story, how it had been scared of mice, and Logan smiled despite the exhaustion creeping into his bones. After dinner, he got her ready for bed, read her 2 chapters of the book they were working through, and tucked her in. She was asleep before he even left the room. Logan moved back to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and sat down at the table. His phone was face down on the counter. He hadn't checked it since the daycare text. He picked it up now. 3 missed calls. All from the same number, a voicemail. Logan frowned and opened it. The voice on the other end was male, clipped, professional. Mr. Pierce, this is David Orton, head of security at DeVos Corporation. We need you to come to Mercy General Hospital as soon as possible. Ms. Hale has been asking for you. Please call back when you receive this message. Logan stared at the phone. Victoria was asking for him? He listened to the message again, just to make sure he had heard it right. Then he checked the time. 9:47 p.m. He couldn't go now. Ava was asleep, and he didn't have anyone to watch her. But the message had said, as soon as possible, and something in the man's tone made it sound urgent, and something in. Logan rubbed his face, thinking. Then he called the number back. It rang twice before someone picked up. Orton? This is Logan Pierce. I got your message. Mr. Pierce. The man's voice relaxed slightly. Thank you for calling back. Ms. Hale is stable, but she's been insistent about speaking with you. Are you able to come to the hospital tonight? I have my daughter. I can't leave her. There was a pause. Understood. What about tomorrow morning? I can be there by 9. That works. I'll let her know. Is she okay? Logan asked, surprising himself. Another pause. She has a concussion, a few broken ribs, and some lacerations. The doctors say she's lucky. If you hadn't been there... He stopped. She knows that. That's why she wants to see you. Logan didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded, even though Orton couldn't see him. I'll be there at 9. Thank you, Mr. Pierce. The line went dead. Logan set the phone down and stared at it for a long time. Mercy General Hospital was a sprawling complex on the north side of the city, all glass and steel and 2 bright lights. Logan found parking in the visitor lot, checked the time, 8:54 a.m., and headed inside. He dropped Ava off at daycare early, told Carla he had an appointment, and promised to pick her up by lunch. She'd hugged him extra tight, like she could sense something was off, but she hadn't asked questions. The lobby was busy, people moving in every direction. Logan stopped at the information desk, gave his name, and was directed to the 4th floor. The elevator ride felt longer than it should have. When the doors opened, Logan stepped out into a quieter hallway. A man in a dark suit was waiting for him. Tall, gray hair, the kind of posture that screamed ex-military. Mr. Pierce? Logan nodded. David Orton. We spoke on the phone. He extended a hand and Logan shook it. Orton's grip was firm, assessing. Ms. Hale's in a private room down the hall. I'll take you. They walked in silence. Logan noticed the way Orton carried himself. Alert, scanning, always aware of his surroundings. Security, sure, but the kind who'd seen real action. Orton stopped in front of a door marked 418. She's awake. The doctors have her on pain meds, so she might be a little off. But she's coherent. Got it. Orton opened the door and stepped aside. The room was large, private, with a window overlooking the city. Medical equipment beeped softly in the corner, and in the bed, propped up against a stack of pillows, was Victoria Hale. She looked different, smaller somehow. Her hair was loose, falling around her shoulders instead of pulled back in that severe ponytail. The left side of her face was bruised, a bandage covering the cut on her forehead. Her arm was in a sling. She turned her head when Logan walked in, and their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Victoria said, her voice quieter than he'd ever heard it. "You came."
Logan stopped a few feet from the bed. "You asked." She nodded slowly, like the movement hurt. "I wasn't sure you would." "Why?" "Because I was horrible to you." She said it plainly, without deflection. "I humiliated you in front of my staff. I treated you like you didn't matter, and then you saved my life anyway."
Logan didn't respond. He didn't trust himself to. Victoria looked down at her hands, which were folded in her lap. "The doctors told me what you did. They said if you hadn't pulled me out when you did, I would have." She trailed off. "I owe you everything." "You don't owe me anything," Logan said. "I do." She looked up at him again.
"And I don't know how to process that."
There was something raw in her voice, something that didn't fit with the woman who'd stood in that hallway and cut him down with a few cold sentences. Logan found himself caught off guard by it.
"You were in an accident," he said finally. "I did what anyone would have done." "No?" Victoria shook her head. "Most people would have driven past, especially after the way I treated you." She paused. "Why didn't you?" What?
Logan thought about that, about the moment he'd stood there in the rain, staring at her unconscious in the wreck, and felt that pull to just walk away. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said. Victoria laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "The right thing? I don't think I've done the right thing in years." Logan didn't know what to say to that, so he stayed quiet. Victoria shifted into the bed, wincing. "The storm knocked out most of the cell towers. My phone's dead. I can't reach my assistant, my board, anyone. Orton's been trying to get in touch with people, but the lines are jammed." She hesitated. "I'm stuck here for at least another day, maybe 2. "That's probably a good thing," Logan said. "You need to rest." "I don't do rest." "Yeah, I'm getting that." She almost smiled. Almost. "I need a favor." Logan raised an eyebrow. "A favor to—" "I know. I have no right to ask, but I don't have anyone else right now." She looked at him, and there was something almost vulnerable in her expression. "Once they discharge me, I need a place to stay, just for a day or 2, until I can get back to my apartment. The roads are flooded, half the city's without power, and my building's been evacuated because of structural concerns." Logan stared at her. "You want to stay with me? I'll pay you. Whatever you think is fair." "That's not—" Logan stopped, shaking his head. "You don't even know where I live." "I don't care where you live. I just need somewhere safe until this mess clears up." Logan thought about his apartment, the peeling paint, the creaky floors, the couch that sagged in the middle, the fact that Ava's toys were scattered across every available surface. "I have a daughter," he said. "I know. A 6-year-old. She's loud. She asks a lot of questions. And the apartment's small. You'd be sleeping on the couch." "I don't care, Victoria said again. "I just need help. And I'm asking you because you're the only person I trust right now." That stopped Logan cold. "You don't even know me." "I know you pulled me out of a burning car when you had every reason not to." Victoria's voice was steady now, certain. "That tells me more than I need to know." Logan looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd made his life hell just days ago was now asking him for help. The smart thing would be to say no, to walk away, to let her figure it out on her own. But he'd never been good at doing the smart thing. "Okay," he said. Victoria blinked. "Okay? You can stay, but just until you can get back to your place." Something shifted in her expression. Relief, maybe, or surprise. "Thank you." Logan nodded. "When are they discharging you?" "What?" "Tomorrow morning, if the swelling goes down." "I'll pick you up." "You don't have to—" "If you're staying with me, I'm picking you up," Logan said firmly. "What time?" Victoria hesitated, then relented. 10. "I'll be here." He turned to leave, but Victoria's voice stopped him. "Logan?" He looked back. "Why are you doing this?" Logan thought about Ava, about the nights he'd spent on the phone with bill collectors, begging for extensions, about the way people looked through him like he didn't exist. "Because nobody should have to ask for help and get turned away," he said. And then he left. He did. The next morning, Logan borrowed a car seat booster from Carla. Ava had outgrown hers months ago, but he hadn't had the money to replace it yet, and drove to the hospital. The city was still recovering from the storm. Branches littered the streets. Traffic lights were out in some areas. Entire blocks were without power. He found Victoria waiting in a wheelchair by the hospital entrance, Orton standing beside her. She was dressed in clothes that looked borrowed, sweatpants and a hoodie that were too big for her. Her hair was pulled back in a loose braid. Without the suit and the heels and the armor of her office, she looked almost normal. Orton helped her into the passenger seat of Logan's beat-up sedan, and she settled in with a grimace, one hand pressed to her ribs. "You good?" Logan asked. "Fine." She wasn't, but he didn't push it. Orton leaned down to the window. "I'll check in later, Ms. Hale. If you need anything, I'll call," Victoria said. "Thank you, David." Orton nodded and stepped back. Logan pulled away from the curb and headed toward his side of town. The drive was quiet at first. Victoria stared out the window, watching the damaged city roll past. Logan kept his eyes on the road, hyper-aware of her presence in the car. This was surreal. Victoria Hale, billionaire CEO, sitting in his 15-year-old Honda with duct tape holding the passenger side mirror in place. "How long have you lived here?" Victoria asked suddenly. 3 years. "And before that?" Logan hesitated. "I moved around a lot." "Military?" He glanced at her, surprised. "How'd you know? The way you carry yourself, the way you assessed the room when you walked into the hospital." "Shucks." She paused. "My father was Air Force." "Aspirski Ika Army." "Oh," Logan said. "Engineer Corps." "Why'd you leave?" That was a question he didn't answer often. "Personal reasons." Victoria nodded like she understood that some doors didn't get opened. "And now you're a janitor." "Yeah." Logan's voice was flat. "I know what you think of that." "I was wrong," Victoria said quietly. Logan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He didn't respond. "I was wrong about a lot of things," Victoria continued, "and I'm sorry." Logan pulled up to a red light and finally looked at her. She was staring straight ahead, her jaw tight. "You don't have to apologize," he said. "Yes, I do." Victoria turned to face him. "What I said to you that day, it was cruel. And it wasn't about you. It was about me taking out my frustration on someone who couldn't fight back." She paused. "That doesn't excuse it, but I need you to know I'm sorry." The light turned green. Logan drove. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay?" "I heard you. Apology accepted." Victoria nodded slowly, and some of the tension in her shoulders eased. They drove the rest of the way in silence. Logan's apartment building looked worse in daylight. The siding was water-stained. The front steps were cracked. A broken lawn chair sat abandoned by the entrance. Logan parked and got out, moving around to help Victoria. She waved him off and climbed out on her own, though he could see the effort it cost her. They headed inside and up the stairs. On the second-floor landing, they passed Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who lived alone with about 15 cats. She stopped, stared at Victoria, then looked at Logan with raised eyebrows. "Friend?" Logan said quickly. "Staying a couple days." Mrs. Chen's expression said she didn't believe that for a second, but she shuffled past without comment. Logan unlocked the door to his apartment and held it open. Victoria stepped inside and he watched her take it all in. The cramped living room, the secondhand furniture, the toys scattered across the floor, the dishes in the sink he hadn't had time to wash. "It's not much," Logan said. "It's fine," Victoria said, and to his surprise, she sounded like she meant it. Logan gestured to the couch. "That's where you'll be sleeping. I'll get you some blankets and a pillow." Victoria sat down carefully, testing the cushions. They sagged under her weight. "Where's your daughter?" "Daycare. I'll pick her up in a few hours." "What's her name?" "Ava." Victoria nodded. "How old?" 6. "Does she know I'm staying here?" Logan paused. "Not yet. I'll explain when I pick her up." "What are you going to tell her?" "The truth. That you're a friend who needed help." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not sure I deserve that." "Be Probably not, Logan said, but she doesn't need to know that. Victoria almost smiled. Logan went to the closet and pulled out a stack of blankets and an extra pillow. He set them on the arm of the couch. Bathrooms down the hall. Kitchens. Well, you can see it from here. Help yourself to whatever's in the fridge. Thank you, Logan nodded. I'm going to run some errands before I get Ava. You need anything? No, I'm good. Bah. He hesitated, then grabbed his keys. There's a first aid kit under the sink if you need it, and my number's on the fridge if something comes up. Logan. Victoria's voice stopped him at the door. I mean it, thank you. Don't mention it. He left before she could say anything else. Logan spent the next 2 hours at the grocery store, stocking up on food. He bought extra, pasta, bread, eggs, fruit, things that would stretch across a few days. His budget was already tight, but having Victoria here meant he couldn't just make do with leftovers and cereal. He also stopped at the pharmacy and picked up more bandages and antiseptic. The cut on Victoria's forehead would need cleaning. By the time he got back to the apartment, it was almost noon. He put the groceries away quietly, not wanting to wake Victoria if she was sleeping. But when he looked into the living room, she was awake, sitting on the couch with her phone plugged into the wall, scrolling through messages with a frown. Service back up? Logan asked. Barely. I've got about 200 emails and 30 missed calls. She set the phone down. My assistant's losing her mind. The board's threatening an emergency vote, and half my executives think I'm dead because I haven't responded in 2 days. You should probably let them know you're alive. I will, just not yet. Victoria rubbed her temples. I need a few more hours before I deal with that circus. I'm sorry, Logan understood that. He moved into the kitchen and started pulling out ingredients for lunch. You hungry? A little? Grilled cheese, okay? Sure. Logan got to work, and a few minutes later he set a plate in front of her. Victoria picked up the sandwich and took a bite, and something in her expression shifted. This is good, she said, surprised. It's just grilled cheese. I know, but... She trailed off. I don't remember the last time someone made me food that didn't come from a restaurant. Logan sat down across from her with his own plate. You don't cook? Down. I don't have time to cook. You should make time. Victoria laughed, but it was a sad sound. You sound like my father. He was smart then. They ate in silence for a while. Outside, the city hummed, distant traffic, sirens, the occasional shout from the street below. Normal sounds, human sounds. Victoria set her plate down. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why'd you really leave the military? Logan took a bite of his sandwich, chewing slowly while he decided how much to say. I had a daughter who needed me more than the army did. Her mother? Not in the picture. Victoria nodded, not pushing. That must have been hard, giving up your career. It was the right call. Do you ever regret it? Logan thought about that, about the late nights studying engineering textbooks, the plans he'd had, the future he'd built in his head, about how all of it had evaporated the moment the doctor had handed him Ava, tiny and fragile and completely dependent on him. No, he said. I don't. Victoria looked at him like she was trying to figure out if he was lying. Then she nodded. You're a better person than I am. I doubt that. You shouldn't. Victoria's voice was quiet. I've spent the last 10 years building something I thought mattered, and the whole time I've been stepping on people like you to do it. She paused. I don't even know why anymore. Logan didn't have an answer for that. Before he could think of one, the door burst open and Ava came running in. Logan's head snapped up. Bug, what? Carla appeared in the doorway, looking sheepish. Sorry, Logan. She saw your car in the lot and bolted before I could stop her. Said she wanted to surprise you. Ava skidded to a halt in the middle of the living room, her eyes going wide as she spotted Victoria on the couch. Daddy? She whispered loudly. There's a lady here. Victoria stared at Ava. Ava stared back, and Logan, caught between them, realized his life had just gotten a whole lot more complicated. Logan stood up quickly, moving between Ava and Victoria like he could somehow shield them from the awkwardness of this moment. Bug, I told you I'd pick you up at the regular time. But I wanted to see you now, Ava said, her eyes still locked on Victoria. Then, With the blunt curiosity only a 6-year-old could manage, she asked, "Why does that lady have a bandage on her head?"
Yao.
Victoria touched the gauze on her forehead reflexively, and for a second she looked completely out of her depth. Logan had seen her command boardrooms, cut down executives with a single glance, carry herself like she owned every space she entered. But sitting there on his sagging couch, faced with a child's direct question, she looked lost.
She was in an accident, Logan said, crouching down to Ava's level. Remember I told you I helped someone the other night? This is her. Her name's Victoria, and she's going to stay with us for a couple days until she feels better. Ava's eyes widened. She's sleeping here? On the couch, yeah. But that's where we watch cartoons.
We can still watch cartoons. Victoria just needs to rest sometimes. Yuchis wopo ishte. Ava processed this, her little face scrunched up in thought. Then she walked right past Logan and stopped in front of Victoria, tilting her head to the side. "Does it hurt?" she asked, pointing at the bandage. Victoria blinked, clearly caught off guard. "A little. When I fall down, Daddy puts a Band-Aid on me, and it makes it better. Do you want a Band-Aid? I have princess ones." Something shifted in Victoria's expression, something soft, almost fragile. "I think I'm okay with this one, but thank you." Ava nodded seriously, like she'd just solved a major problem. Then she climbed up onto the couch next to Victoria, completely uninvited, and peered at her face. "You're really pretty," Ava announced, "even with the bruises." Victoria's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "Thank you." "Do you like cartoons?" I don't know. I haven't watched one in a long time." Ava gasped like Victoria had just confessed to a crime. "You don't watch cartoons?" "I work a lot." "That's sad." Ava patted Victoria's hand with the kind of earnest sympathy only children possessed. "You can watch with me. We're doing Bluey today. It's about a family of dogs, but they're nice dogs, not scary ones." Hoko! Logan stood there watching this unfold, completely unsure whether to intervene. Carla was still in the doorway, her hand over her mouth, clearly trying not to laugh. Victoria looked at Ava, then at Logan, then back at Ava. "Okay," she said quietly. "I can watch with you." "Boy, but poor she." Ava beamed and immediately started explaining the entire premise of the show in a breathless rush of words that didn't leave room for anyone else to speak. Victoria just sat there, nodding occasionally, looking like she'd been dropped into an alternate dimension. Carla caught Logan's eye and mouthed, "You good?" Logan nodded, and Carla gave him a little wave before slipping out, closing the door behind her. Logan moved into the kitchen, giving them space, and started putting away the rest of the groceries. Through the doorway, he could hear Ava chattering away, her voice rising and falling with excitement as she pointed at the TV screen. Victoria's responses were quieter, more measured, but she was responding, actually engaging. By the time Logan finished in the kitchen and walked back into the living room, Ava had somehow convinced Victoria to sit on the floor with her, and they were building a tower out of wooden blocks. Victoria's movements were careful, deliberate, her ribs clearly bothering her, but she was doing it anyway. "Daddy, look!" Ava pointed at the tower, which was leaning slightly but still standing. "We made it taller than me." "That's pretty tall," Logan said, settling into the armchair. "Victoria's really good at building," Ava said proudly, like she'd discovered this herself. "She knows how to make it not fall down." Victoria glanced at Logan, and there was something almost sheepish in her expression. "Engineering degree," she said by way of explanation. Logan raised an eyebrow. "You have an engineering degree?" "MIT, graduated top of my class." She placed another block carefully on the tower. "Before I decided business school made more sense." "Why?" Victoria paused, her hand hovering over the blocks. "Because my father told me engineers build things, but business leaders build empires." She said it flatly. "Shike," like she was quoting someone else's words. "He was right, I guess." "Was he?" Logan asked. Victoria didn't answer. She just placed the block and sat back, watching Ava add another one to the top. They spent the rest of the afternoon like that. Ava dragging Victoria from one activity to the next with the kind of relentless energy only kids had, and Victoria, despite clearly being exhausted and in pain, going along with it. They colored. They played a card game Ava made up on the spot with rules that changed every 3 minutes. They read a picture book about a mouse who wanted to be an astronaut. And through it all, Logan watched Victoria transform. Not completely, she was still careful, still guarded in the way she spoke and moved, but there were moments where her walls came down. When Ava said something funny and Victoria laughed, a real laugh that sounded surprised, like she'd forgotten she could make that sound. When Ava asked her to help tie a ribbon around her stuffed rabbit, and Victoria's hands fumbled with the knot, clumsy and uncertain, and she had to try 3 times before getting it right. By the time dinner rolled around, Ava had claimed Victoria as her personal guest, sitting next to her at the table and insisting on sharing her juice box. Logan made spaghetti, nothing fancy, just pasta and jarred sauce, and set plates in front of them. Ava dug in immediately, getting sauce on her chin within seconds. Victoria ate more slowly, carefully, like she was still processing the fact that she was sitting in a cramped kitchen in a part of town she'd probably never visited before, eating a $5 meal off mismatched plates. "This is good," Victoria said after a few bites. "It's just spaghetti," Logan said. "I know." Victoria twirled pasta onto her fork. "But it's good." Ava looked up at her, sauce smeared across her face. "Daddy makes the best spaghetti, and grilled cheese and pancakes, and I get it, Bug. I'm a culinary genius." Ava giggled, and Victoria smiled, a real smile this time, not the polite corporate version Logan had seen in passing at the tower. After dinner, Logan cleaned up while Ava insisted on showing Victoria her room. He could hear them down the hall, Ava's voice explaining every single toy, every drawing taped to the wall, every rock and feather she'd collected from the playground. When they came back out, Ava was yawning, her energy finally starting to crash. "Bedtime, Logan said. "But I'm not tired." "Yes, you are." Ava pouted, but didn't argue. She walked over to Victoria and held out her arms. "Good night hug?" Victoria hesitated, then leaned down carefully, letting Ava wrap her small arms around her neck. "Good night, Ava." "Will you still be here in the morning?" "I will." "Good." Ava pulled back, satisfied. "Then we can have pancakes." Logan scooped her up, ignoring her half-hearted protests, and carried her to the bathroom to brush her teeth. By the time he got her into bed, she was already half asleep, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. "Daddy?" she mumbled as he pulled the blanket up to her chin. "Yeah, Bug?" "I like Victoria. She's nice." Logan kissed her forehead. "Yeah, she is." Ava's eyes fluttered closed, and within seconds, she was out. Logan stood there for a moment, watching her sleep, then quietly left the room, leaving the door cracked open just enough to let the hallway light in. When he came back to the living room, Victoria was sitting on the couch, her phone in her hands, staring at the screen with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Everything okay?" Logan asked. Victoria looked up, startled, like she'd forgotten he was there. "Yeah, just work stuff." Logan sat down in the armchair across from her. "You don't have to answer those tonight, you know. You're supposed to be resting." "I know." Victoria set the phone down face up on the couch cushion. "But if I don't, they'll keep calling, and eventually someone will track me down. Let them." Victoria gave him a look. "You don't understand. My company doesn't stop just because I'm not there. There are decisions that need to be made, contracts that need signing, fires that need putting out. And none of that matters if you collapse from exhaustion." "I'm fine. Yeah, you have broken ribs and a concussion," Logan said flatly. "You're not fine, and pushing yourself isn't going to make you heal faster." Victoria's jaw tightened. For a moment, Logan thought she was going to argue, to push back with that same cold authority she'd used on him in the tower. But instead, she just looked away, her shoulders sagging slightly. "I don't know how to do this," she said quietly. "Do what?" "Well, stop." She gestured vaguely at the room, at herself, at the phone still glowing on the cushion beside her. "I've been running at full speed for so long, I don't remember what it feels like to just be still." Logan leaned back in the chair, studying her. "Then maybe this is a good time to learn." Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You make it sound easy."
It's not.
But you're here anyway, so you might as well try. Was. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Logan saw something flicker in her eyes. Uncertainty, maybe, or fear. He recognized it because he'd felt it himself, years ago, when he'd realized the life he'd planned was gone and he had to build something new from nothing. Your daughter, Victoria said after a long silence. She's lucky to have you. Logan didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. I mean it, Victoria continued. The way she looks at you, the way she trusts you, that's not something you can fake. She's a good kid. She is, but that's because of you. Victoria's voice was softer now, almost wistful. My father worked constantly. I barely saw him. When I did, it was always about performance, grades, achievements, what I was going to do next. I don't remember him ever just sitting with me the way you do with her. I'm sorry, Logan said. Don't be. It made me who I am. She paused, or at least who I thought I wanted to be. Logan didn't push. He just sat there, letting the silence stretch between them, comfortable and heavy. Eventually, Victoria picked up her phone again, scrolled through a few messages, then turned it off completely. She set it on the coffee table and looked at Logan. Okay, she said. Okay, what? I'll try. To stop. For tonight, at least. Logan nodded. Good. He got up, grabbed the stack of blankets he'd left on the couch earlier, and handed them to her along with the pillow. Bathroom's yours if you need it. I'll be up for a while, so if you need anything, just let me know. Thank you, Victoria said, and this time, when she said it, it didn't sound like a corporate pleasantry. It sounded real. Logan went to his room, leaving the door open in case Ava called out, and sat on the edge of his bed. Through the thin walls, he could hear Victoria moving around in the living room, the creak of the couch as she settled in. This was insane, he knew that. Letting his boss, the woman who'd nearly gotten him fired, stay in his apartment, sleep on his couch, eat his food. It defied every reasonable boundary. But when he thought about the way she'd looked at Ava, the way her whole demeanor had shifted when his daughter had climbed onto the couch next to her, he didn't regret it. Not yet, anyway. The next morning, Logan woke to the smell of coffee. He sat up, disoriented, and checked the time. 6:15 a.m. He'd overslept, something he almost never did. He pulled on a shirt and walked out into the kitchen. Victoria was standing at the counter, one hand braced against the edge for support, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. She was still wearing the borrowed sweatpants and hoodie from yesterday, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. You're up early, Logan said. Victoria turned, wincing slightly at the movement. Old habit. I've been waking up at 5 for the past decade. Hard to break. Logan took one of the mugs she offered him. You didn't have to make coffee. I wanted to. Besides, you don't have a fancy espresso machine, so this is about as complicated as it gets. She took a sip, made a face. It's terrible, by the way. Yeah, I know. Can't afford the good stuff. I wasn't criticizing, just observing. Victoria leaned against the counter, cradling her mug in both hands. I used to drink coffee like this in college, before I convinced myself I needed a $15 latte to function. Logan sipped his own coffee. It was terrible, but it was also familiar, comforting in its mediocrity. You miss it? College? Sometimes. It was simpler. I had goals, a clear path. Now, she trailed off, staring into her mug. Now I'm not sure what I'm working toward anymore. You run a billion-dollar company. That's not nothing. It's not, Victoria agreed, but it's also not enough. Or maybe it's too much. I can't tell anymore. Logan set his mug down. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you take the job? CEO, I mean. Victoria was quiet for a moment, her thumb tracing the rim of her mug. Because my father built that company from the ground up, and when he died, everyone expected me to let it fall apart. They thought I was too young, too inexperienced, too emotional. She looked up at Logan. So I proved them wrong. I took over, restructured everything, turned a profit within 6 months. I made sure no one could ever question whether I belonged there. And now? Now I'm 30 years old, and I can't remember the last time I did something because I wanted to, not because I had to prove a point. Logan understood that more than he wanted to admit. He'd spent years trying to prove he could handle being a single father, that he didn't need help, that he was enough. And somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten to ask himself if the life he was building was the one he actually wanted. Daddy, Mick. Both of them turned. Ava was standing in the hallway, her hair sticking up in every direction, her rabbit dragging on the floor beside her. "Morning, Bug," Logan said. Ava padded over to him, rubbing her eyes. Then she spotted Victoria and perked up. "You're still here." "I am," Victoria said. "Are we having pancakes?" Logan looked at Victoria, who shrugged. "I could eat." "Pancakes it is," Logan said. He pulled out the ingredients, flour, eggs, milk, a mostly empty bottle of vanilla extract, and got to work. Ava climbed onto one of the kitchen chairs, swinging her legs, and started telling Victoria about a dream she'd had involving a dragon and a bicycle. Victoria listened, asking questions in the right places, and Logan found himself glancing over at them while he mixed the batter. There was something surreal about the scene. His daughter and his boss, sitting at his kitchen table talking about imaginary dragons like it was the most natural thing in the world. He poured the batter onto the griddle, flipping pancakes while Ava's story grew increasingly elaborate. By the time he set a stack of pancakes in front of them, the dragon had somehow learned to juggle. They ate together, the three of them crowded around the small table, and for a little while, it almost felt normal, like this was just how things were. After breakfast, Logan cleaned up while Victoria sat with Ava on the couch, watching cartoons. He kept expecting her to get restless, to reach for her phone, to retreat back into the version of herself that lived in the tower. But she didn't. She just sat there, letting Ava lean against her shoulder, watching animated dogs navigate the complications of family life. Around mid-morning, Logan's phone buzzed. He pulled it out and saw a text from Marcus, the security guard from the tower. "You see the news? Buildings being evacuated. Structural damage from the storm. Nobody's allowed back in until inspections are done. Could be days." Logan stared at the message, then looked over at Victoria. "Hey," he said. "You see this?" Victoria glanced up. "See what?" He handed her his phone. She read the message, her expression shifting from neutral to tense in the span of a second. "Days," she repeated. "Looks like it." Victoria handed the phone back, her jaw tight. "I need to make some calls." She stood up carefully, retrieved her phone from the coffee table, and stepped out onto the small balcony off the living room. Through the glass door, Logan could see her pacing, or trying to, given the limited space and her injuries, her phone pressed to her ear. Ava looked up at Logan. "Is Victoria mad?" "Not mad, just stressed." "Why?" "Grown-up stuff." Ava accepted this with a shrug and went back to her show. Logan watched Victoria through the glass. Her free hand was gesturing sharply as she spoke, her shoulders tense. Whatever was happening on the other end of that call, it wasn't going well. After about 10 minutes, she came back inside, her face pale. "Problem?" Logan asked. "The board wants to hold an emergency vote," Victoria said, her voice tight. "They're saying that with me unavailable and the building compromised, they need to install an interim CEO. Richard's pushing for it." "Can they do that?" "Technically, yes, if they can prove I'm incapacitated." She sat down heavily on the couch, one hand pressed to her ribs. "Which I'm not, but I can't exactly show up to a board meeting looking like this." Logan thought about that. "So don't show up in person, do it remotely." "They'll say I'm too injured to lead." "Are you?" Victoria's eyes snapped to his, sharp. "No." "Then prove it." She stared at him for a long moment, then pulled out her phone again and started typing rapidly. "I need to set up a video conference today. Can I use your laptop?" "Yeah, but it's old. Might not run the best." "It'll have to do." Logan grabbed his laptop from his bedroom, a machine he'd bought secondhand 3 years ago that barely ran basic programs, and handed it to her. Victoria opened it, made a face at the outdated operating system, but got to work. Within 20 minutes, she'd scheduled a call with the board for 2 p.m. Then she looked down at herself, still in borrowed sweats, hair unbrushed, face bruised, and swore under her breath. "I look like I got hit by a truck." "You kind of did," Logan pointed out,
That's not helping. Ava, who'd been half watching this whole exchange, piped up. You could borrow Daddy's nice shirt. He wears it to important things. Victoria looked at Logan. You have a nice shirt? One, Logan admitted, for funerals and job interviews. Can I borrow it? Logan went to his closet and pulled out the shirt, a plain white button-down he'd bought 5 years ago and worn maybe a dozen times. He handed it to Victoria. Thank you, she said. Then she disappeared into the bathroom. She emerged 10 minutes later looking different. She'd put on the shirt over the sweatpants, buttoned it up to her collar, and somehow managed to tame her hair into something that resembled professionalism. The bruises were still visible, and the bandage on her forehead wasn't going anywhere, but she looked like someone who could run a meeting. How do I look? She asked. Like a CEO, Logan said honestly. Victoria nodded, then sat down on the couch with the laptop balanced on her knees. Okay, here goes nothing. At exactly 2 p.m., the call connected. Logan stayed in the kitchen, giving her space. p.m., the call, but he could hear her voice through the doorway, calm, authoritative, completely different from the woman who'd been sitting on his floor building block towers with his daughter. The call lasted an hour. Logan kept Ava occupied in her room, playing quietly, while Victoria dealt with her board. He couldn't make out most of what was being said, but he caught fragments, numbers, projections, reassurances that she was capable, that the company was stable, that they didn't need an interim anything. When she finally closed the laptop, her hands were shaking. Logan walked over. How'd it go? I think I bought myself some time, Victoria said, but Richard's not going to let this go. He smells blood in the water. What's his problem? He wants my job, has for years. He's been waiting for me to slip up. And this, she gestured at her injuries, at the laptop, at the whole situation, is the opening he's been looking for. So what are you going to do? Victoria looked at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked genuinely uncertain. I don't know. Ava appeared in the doorway then, her rabbit tucked under one arm. Are you done with work? Victoria glanced at her, then at Logan, then back at Ava. Yeah, she said quietly. I'm done. Good. Come play with me. And just like that, Victoria set the laptop aside and let Ava pull her back into a world where the biggest concern was whether the dragon could really learn to juggle. Logan watched them go, and he thought about the version of Victoria who'd humiliated him in that hallway, and the version sitting on his living room floor right now, letting a 6-year-old arrange her hair into lopsided pigtails. They weren't the same person. Or maybe they were, and he was just finally seeing past the armor. That night, after Ava had gone to bed, Logan and Victoria sat in the living room in comfortable silence. She was stretched out on the couch, her injuries clearly bothering her, but she didn't complain. Logan sat in the armchair, a book open in his lap that he wasn't really reading. Can I ask you something? Victoria said suddenly. Logan looked up. Yeah, Victoria. Why did you really stop to help me that night? And don't say it was the right thing to do. I need to know the real reason. Logan closed the book. He thought about lying, about giving her the answer she probably wanted. But he was tired, and she deserved the truth. Because I saw you, he said. Not the CEO, not the woman in the suit, just a person who needed help. And I couldn't walk away from that. Victoria was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I spent years making sure no one saw me like that. Just a person, I mean. I thought vulnerability was weakness. It's not. I know that now. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. You know what the worst part is? I built this entire life, company, reputation, everything, and I did it alone. I thought that made me strong. But sitting here, watching you with Ava, I realized I just made myself lonely. Logan didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. He just sat there, letting her words settle in the space between them. I don't know how to fix it, Victoria said quietly. I don't even know if I can. You don't fix it all at once, Logan said. You just start, one small thing at a time. Victoria looked at him, and in her eyes, he saw the same exhaustion he felt every day. The weight of trying to hold everything together when it felt like the world was actively working against you. Okay, she said finally. I'll try. And for the first time since she'd crashed into his life, Logan believed her. The next 3 days settled into a rhythm that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. Victoria's building remained closed, the inspection team citing water damage and compromised structural integrity that would take at least a week to assess. The tower where she worked stayed partially operational, but without access to her executive suite and with half the staff working remotely, the chaos she'd predicted came anyway. She spent her mornings on Logan's couch, laptop balanced precariously, fielding calls and putting out fires. Her afternoons belonged to Ava, who decided that Victoria was the most interesting thing to happen to her world in months and wasn't about to let that opportunity go to waste. Logan watched it unfold from the edges, managing his own shifts at the tower while trying to keep his small apartment from imploding under the weight of having a third person in it. The space wasn't meant for this. The bathroom schedule alone required negotiation. Victoria needed quiet for her calls, but Ava didn't understand the concept of volume control. The refrigerator, already struggling, now had to stretch further. But they made it work. On the fourth morning, Logan woke to voices in the kitchen. He checked the time, 5:47 a.m., and pulled himself out of bed, his back protesting. When he walked out, he found Victoria and Ava sitting at the table together. Ava was still in her pajamas, her hair a wild mess. Victoria had clearly been up for a while. Already dressed in this rotation of borrowed clothes Logan had managed to scrape together from his own limited wardrobe. "What's going on?" Logan asked. Ava looked up, eyes bright. "Victoria's teaching me about buildings." Logan looked at Victoria, who had the decency to appear slightly embarrassed. "She woke up early. I heard her moving around and thought something was wrong. Turns out she just wanted company. I had a dream about the tower falling down," Ava explained matter-of-factly. "So Victoria's showing me why buildings don't do that." On the table between them was a structure made entirely of dry spaghetti and marshmallows. It looked absurd, but it was standing. "It's called a truss system," Victoria said, pointing to the triangular shapes formed by the pasta. "The weight distributes across multiple points instead of just one. That's why bridges and buildings don't collapse even when they're holding heavy loads." Ava poked one of the marshmallows. "What if there's an earthquake?" Then you design it to flex instead of break. Give it room to move. Like when I do cartwheels? Victoria smiled. Exactly like that. Logan poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter, watching them. Victoria's face was animated in a way he'd never seen at the tower. She wasn't performing professionalism or maintaining distance. She was just present. "Daddy, look!" Ava held up the spaghetti structure. "We made it so it won't fall." "That's pretty cool, Bug. Victoria says when I'm older I can be an engineer if I want." Logan glanced at Victoria, who met his gaze evenly. She asked what I studied in school. I told her the truth. "And then she said I could build rockets," Ava added. "Or bridges. Or really tall buildings that touch the clouds." "You could," Victoria said, "if you wanted to." There was something wistful in her voice, something that made Logan wonder if she was talking to Ava or to some younger version of herself. After breakfast, Logan got ready for work. He'd managed to swap shifts around so he could be home earlier in the evenings, but he still had to go in. As he grabbed his keys, Victoria appeared in the doorway. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "The disciplinary warning you got because of me. Is that still on your record?" Logan paused. He hadn't thought about it in days, which was probably a bad sign. "Yeah, why?" "Because it shouldn't be." Victoria's jaw tightened. "I'm going to have it removed." "You don't have to do that." "Yes, I do. It was my fault. I knocked the coffee over, and you took the blame for it." She crossed her arms, wincing slightly at the movement. "I should have said something that day. I didn't, and that was wrong." Logan studied her. "You were pretty convinced I was incompetent." "I was convinced everyone beneath me was incompetent," Victoria corrected. "Turns out I was just an asshole." Despite himself, Logan smiled. "Yeah, you were. I'm sorry." "You already apologized." "I know, but I need to fix this too. Not just say it." Victoria pulled out her phone. "I'm sending an email to HR right now. That warning's getting scrubbed from your file. Victoria." "It's done." She typed rapidly, then hit send. "There. And before you argue, this isn't charity. This is accountability. Logan didn't know what to say to that. Part of him wanted to protest,
to maintain some kind of boundary between his life and hers. But another part, the part that was tired of being stepped on and dismissed, just nodded. "Thank you," he said. Victoria's expression softened. "You're welcome." He left for work feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The tower felt different now. Logan moved through the hallways he'd cleaned 100 times, but he couldn't stop thinking about Victoria sitting in his apartment, building structures out of pasta with his daughter. It created a weird cognitive dissonance. This place represented everything she was supposed to be. And yet the version of her he'd been living with for the past few days didn't fit that mold at all. He was emptying trash bins on the 29th floor when he ran into Richard, the CFO, who'd been with Victoria during the coffee incident. Richard was on his phone, his voice low and clipped, and he didn't notice Logan until he nearly walked into his cart. "Watch it," Richard snapped, then did a double take. "You're the janitor, the one who spilled coffee on Ms. Hale." Logan kept his expression neutral. "That's me." Richard's eyes narrowed. "You know where she is?" "No idea." "Interesting, because she's been unreachable for days, and yet she somehow managed to show up for a board video call looking like she was working from home." Richard stepped closer, his tone turning pointed. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Logan met his gaze evenly. "Like I said, no idea." Richard stared at him for a long moment, clearly trying to decide if Logan was lying. Then he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, if you do happen to hear from her, let her know the board's getting restless. Absentee leadership doesn't inspire confidence. I'll keep that in mind." Richard brushed past him, already back on his phone, and Logan stood there feeling the anger simmer in his chest. He knew Richard's type, the kind of person who saw every crisis as an opportunity to climb higher, who didn't care who got crushed in the process. He finished his shift and headed home, the encounter still gnawing at him. When he walked into the apartment, he found Victoria on the couch, her laptop open, her face pale. Ava was in her room, the sound of her playing drifting down the hallway. "You okay?" Logan asked. Victoria looked up and he could see the strain in her eyes. "Richard's making his move. He's convinced 3 board members to support a vote of no confidence." Logan set his keys down. "When?" "End of the week. He's arguing that my injuries make me unfit to lead, and that the company needs stable leadership during the recovery." She laughed bitterly. "Stable leadership?" Like he has any idea what that means. "Can he actually pull it off?" "Maybe, if he gets enough votes." Victoria closed the laptop and rubbed her temples. "I've spent 10 years building this company, and he's going to take it from me because I had the audacity to get hurt." "That's not why he's doing it," Logan said, sitting down in the armchair. "He's doing it because he wants power, and you're in the way. The injury's just an excuse." Victoria looked at him. "You met him at the tower today. He was fishing for information about you. I didn't give him anything, but he's definitely circling." "And of course he is." Victoria's hands curled into fists. "I should be there, at the office, handling this in person. Instead, I'm stuck here, hiding out like some kind of fugitive." "You're not hiding. You're recovering." "It feels the same." Logan leaned forward. "You want my advice? Do I have a choice?" "Stop fighting this alone." Logan's voice was firm. "You've been trying to prove you don't need anyone since the day I met you. But you do. Everyone does. So call the people you trust, the ones who actually have your back, and build a strategy. Stop trying to win by yourself." Victoria stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she nodded. "Okay." "Okay? You're right, I can't do this alone." "I see." She picked up her phone. "I need to make some calls." She spent the next hour on the phone, and Logan could hear the shift in her voice. Less defensive, more collaborative. She was reaching out, asking for support, admitting she needed help. It was a small thing, but it felt significant. By the time she finished, her shoulders had relaxed slightly, and some of the color had returned to her face. "Better?" Logan asked. "A little." Victoria set the phone down. "I have a plan. It's not perfect, but it's something." "Good." Ava emerged from her room then, carrying a drawing she'd made. Look, I drew all of us. She held up the paper. 3 stick figures stood in front of a rectangular shape that was presumably the apartment. One had curly hair, Ava. One was tall with broad shoulders, Logan. And one had long dark hair and a bandage on its head, Victoria. That's us, Ava announced proudly. We're a team. Victoria stared at the drawing, and something in her expression cracked. Yeah, she said quietly. We are, Sam. The rest of the week moved faster than Logan expected. Victoria's plan involved a lot of phone calls, video conferences, and legal consultations that made his head spin just listening to them. She was building a case, gathering support, preparing to fight Richard's vote with everything she had. But in between all of that, she still made time for Ava. They built more spaghetti structures. They read books. They watched cartoons. And slowly, Logan watched Victoria's edges soften in ways that felt permanent. One evening, after Ava had gone to bed, Victoria and Logan sat on the balcony, the city lights sprawling out below them. It wasn't a nice balcony, barely big enough for 2 folding chairs, but it offered a view that almost made up for it. Can I tell you something? Victoria said.
Sure, Chet. I don't want to go back. Logan looked at her. Back where? To my apartment, to my life. She stared out at the city. I know I have to.
I know this, she gestured at the apartment behind them, isn't sustainable, but I don't want to. Why not? Victoria was quiet for a long time. Because this is the first time in years I've felt like a person instead of a machine. And I'm terrified that the moment I step back into that world, I'll lose it again. Logan understood that fear. He'd felt it himself when he'd left the military, when he'd realized the person he'd been didn't fit the life he needed to build. You won't lose it, he said, not if you don't let yourself. How do you know? Because you're not the same person who walked into this apartment 5 days ago, and you can't unbecome that. Victoria turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. You really believe that? Yeah, I do. She nodded slowly, like she was trying to convince herself. What if I fail? What if I go back and Richard wins and I lose everything anyway? Then you lose it, Logan said simply. And you figure out what comes next, same way everyone else does. That's not very comforting. It's not supposed to be, it's just true. Logan leaned back in his chair. You've been so focused on not failing that you forgot failing isn't the end. It's just another starting point. Victoria laughed, but it was a soft sound, almost fond. When did you become so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just tired of pretending life comes with guarantees. They sat in silence for a while, the sounds of the city washing over them, car horns, distant music, the hum of a world that never stopped moving. Thank you, Victoria said finally. For what? For letting me stay. For not treating me like a burden. For showing me what it looks like when someone actually cares more about people than power. Logan didn't know how to respond to that, so he just nodded. Victoria stood up carefully, still favoring her ribs. I should get some sleep. Big day tomorrow. The vote? No, I'm going back to the tower, just for a few hours. I need to be seen to remind people I'm still here. She paused. Will you come with me? Logan blinked. Me? Yeah, I know it's a lot to ask, but I don't want to do this alone, and you're the only person I trust right now. Logan thought about his shift schedule, about Ava, about all the reasons he should say no. But when he looked at Victoria, standing there in his borrowed clothes with her walls down and her guard lowered, he couldn't find it in himself to refuse. Okay, he said, I'll come. Relief washed over her face. Thank you. She went inside and Logan stayed on the balcony a little longer, staring out at the city and wondering what the hell he was getting himself into. The next morning, Logan called Carla and asked if she could watch Ava for a few extra hours. Carla, bless her, didn't ask questions, just told him to drop Ava off whenever he needed. Victoria had somehow managed to get a set of her own clothes delivered, a sharp gray suit that looked expensive even to Logan's untrained eye. She'd showered, done her hair, and when she stepped out of the bathroom, she looked like the CEO he'd first met in that hallway, except not quite. There was something different in the way she carried herself now, less rigid, more human. Ready? She asked. As I'll ever be. They drove to the tower in Logan's car, which felt absurd. He half expected Victoria to comment on the cracked dashboard or the check engine light that had been on for 6 months, but she didn't say a word. She just sat in the passenger seat staring out the window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When they pulled into the parking garage, Logan could see her tension ratcheting up with every floor they climbed. By the time they parked, her jaw was tight, her shoulders squared. "You don't have to do this," Logan said. "Yes, I do." They took the elevator up to the executive floor. The doors opened, and Logan stepped out into the world he'd only ever seen as an outsider. People in suits moved through the hallways with purpose, their voices low and urgent. No one gave him a second glance, just another employee, another face in the crowd. But when Victoria stepped out beside him, the energy shifted. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Someone gasped. Victoria ignored it all. She walked down the hallway like she owned it, which, technically, she did, and Logan followed, feeling out of place but unwilling to leave her side. They reached her office, and Victoria's assistant, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an efficient demeanor, nearly dropped her coffee when she saw them. "Ms. Hale, we didn't know you were coming in today." "I'm here now, Diane. Clear my schedule for the next 2 hours. I need to make some calls." "Bullshit." "Of course." And Diane's eyes flicked to Logan, confused. "Should I—" "Logan's with me," Victoria said firmly. "He stays." Diane nodded, though Logan could see the questions in her expression. She stepped aside, and Victoria walked into her office with Logan behind her. The space was massive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. The furniture was sleek and modern, all clean lines and expensive materials. It smelled like leather and something faintly floral. Victoria closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. "You okay?" Logan asked. "Yeah, it's a lot." She moved to her desk and sat down, running her hand along the smooth surface like she was reacquainting herself with it. "I spent so much time in this room, and now it feels foreign." Logan walked over to the window and looked out. From up here, the city looked small, manageable, like something you could control if you just tried hard enough. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked. "No," Victoria admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." She picked up her phone and started making calls. Logan stayed by the window, listening to her navigate conversations with board members, executives, and stakeholders. She was good at it, confident, persuasive, strategic. But there was something different now, a warmth in her tone that hadn't been there before. She wasn't just fighting for her position, she was fighting for something bigger. After about an hour, there was a knock on the door. Victoria called out, "Come in," and Richard stepped inside. He stopped when he saw Logan, his expression flickering with surprise before smoothing back into practiced neutrality. "Victoria," he said, "I didn't expect to see you here." Clearly. Victoria stood, and even though she was still visibly injured, she commanded the room. "I heard you've been busy, Richard, gathering votes, making calls. Richard's smile was thin, just ensuring the company's stability. "By trying to remove me?" "By doing what's necessary." Richard's eyes flicked to Logan again, dismissive. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "Logan stays," Victoria said. "He's here at my request." Richard's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. "Fine. Then let's be direct. You're injured, Victoria. You've been absent for nearly a week. The board is concerned, and rightfully so. We need leadership that's present, that's capable." "I am capable," Victoria cut in, "and I've been working remotely, handling every major decision that's come across my desk. Check with Diane if you don't believe me." "Working remotely isn't the same as being here." "Neither is staging a coup." Victoria's voice was sharp now, cutting. "Let's not pretend this is about my health, Richard. You want my job. You've wanted it since the day I took over, but you're not going to get it by exploiting a car accident." Richard's expression darkened. "You're being emotional." "I'm being honest. There's a difference." Victoria stepped forward, and despite her injuries, she looked formidable. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm calling a full board meeting for Monday, in person. And I'm going to show every single one of them that I'm perfectly capable of leading this company. And if you want to challenge me, you're welcome to try. But do it honestly, not through backroom deals and manipulations. Richard stared at her, his hands clenched at his sides. Then he smiled, cold and calculated. Monday, then. We'll see how confident you are when the votes are actually cast. He turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him. Victoria sank back into her chair, her bravado crumbling the moment he was gone. Her hands were shaking. Logan moved to her desk. You did good. I don't feel good. I feel like I'm about to throw up. See, that's normal. You just stood up to a guy who's trying to destroy you. Victoria looked up at him, and there was fear in her eyes. Real, raw fear. What if he wins? Then he wins, Logan said. And you move on, but you're not going to make it easy for him. Victoria nodded, taking a shaky breath. Okay. She stood up, straightened her jacket, and walked back out into the hallway with Logan beside her. They spent the next hour making the rounds, stopping by departments, talking to employees, showing everyone that she was present, engaged, and very much in control. By the time they left, Victoria looked exhausted, but there was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before. On the drive back, she leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. Anytime. I mean it. I couldn't have done that without you. Logan didn't respond. He just drove, the city rolling past them, and thought about how strange life could be. A week ago, this woman had been his boss, someone he'd barely spoken to. Now she was sitting in his car, trusting him with pieces of herself she didn't show anyone else. He still wasn't sure what to make of it, but he knew he didn't regret pulling her out of that wreck, not even a little bit. Monday arrived like a storm cloud, heavy and inevitable. Logan woke before his alarm, the anxiety that had been building all weekend finally reaching its peak. He lay there in the dark, listening to the apartment settle around him, and thought about what today meant for Victoria. She'd spent the entire weekend preparing. Conference calls that stretched late into the night, documents spread across every surface of his living room, her voice growing hoarse from talking, her movements slower as exhaustion compounded with her injuries. Logan had watched her push herself to the edge, and every time he told her to rest, she'd look at him with those gray eyes and say, I can't. Not yet. Ava had picked up on the tension too. She'd been quieter than usual, watching Victoria with a concern that seemed too old for a 6-year-old. Yesterday, she'd brought Victoria her stuffed rabbit without being asked and set it on the couch next to her. He makes me feel better when I'm scared, Ava had said simply. Victoria had stared at the rabbit for a long moment, then pulled Ava into a careful hug. Thank you, sweetheart. Now Logan got out of bed and moved quietly to the kitchen. Victoria was already awake, sitting at the table with her laptop, dressed in a black suit that made her look sharp and untouchable again. But her hands were wrapped around a mug of coffee, and they were shaking. You sleep at all? Logan asked. An hour, maybe. She didn't look up from the screen. I've been going over the numbers one more time, making sure everything's airtight. Logan poured himself coffee and sat down across from her. You ready for this? No. Victoria finally looked at him, and the vulnerability in her face hit him hard. But I'm doing it anyway. You're going to be fine. You don't know that. You're right. I don't. Logan set his mug down. But I know you, and you don't give up, even when you should. Victoria almost smiled. Is that a compliment? Take it however you want. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the day pressing down on both of them. Then Ava padded out of her room, still half asleep, and climbed into Logan's lap without a word. Morning, Bug, Logan said, wrapping his arms around her. Ava rubbed her eyes and looked at Victoria. Are you going to work today? I am. Are you going to win? Victoria's expression softened. I'm going to try. Daddy says trying is what matters most. Your dad's a smart man. Ava nodded seriously, then leaned over and whispered loudly to Logan, Is Victoria going to come back? Logan's chest tightened. He hadn't thought about what happened after today. If Victoria won, she'd move back to her apartment, back to her life. If she lost, he didn't know, but either way, this arrangement was temporary. I don't know, Bug, he said honestly. Ava frowned, then looked at Victoria. You should come back. We like having you here. Victoria's eyes glistened and she blinked quickly, I like being here too. An hour later, Logan dropped Ava off at daycare with promises to pick her up early. Then he drove Victoria to the tower, the silence between them heavy with everything they weren't saying. When they arrived, the parking garage was already full. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., and it was only 8:30, but clearly people wanted to be there early. Logan found a spot on the 4th level and killed the engine. Victoria didn't move. "You want a minute?" Logan asked. "Yeah." They sat there, the concrete walls closing in around them, and Logan watched Victoria gather herself. She closed her eyes, took 3 slow breaths, then opened them again. "Okay," she said. "Let's go." They rode the elevator up in silence. When the doors opened to the executive floor, the energy was electric. People were clustered in groups, their voices low, and Logan could feel the speculation hanging in the air like humidity. Victoria walked past them all without a word, her head high, her stride confident despite the limp she was trying to hide. Logan stayed close, and he could feel the eyes on him, confusion, curiosity, a few flickers of recognition from people who'd seen him cleaning these floors. They reached the boardroom. Through the glass walls, Logan could see people already gathering. Richard was there, talking to 2 other executives Logan didn't recognize. When Richard spotted Victoria, his expression shifted into something smug and satisfied. Victoria paused at the door. "I need to go in alone." "You sure?" "Yeah, this is my fight." She looked at him, and for a moment, the mask slipped. "But thank you for everything." Logan wanted to say something meaningful, something that would give her strength, but the words stuck in his throat. So he just nodded. Victoria straightened her shoulders and walked into the boardroom. Logan found a seat in the hallway outside, close enough to see through the glass but too far to hear what was being said. He watched as the board members filed in, 12 people total, all older, all carrying themselves with the kind of confidence that came from decades of power. The meeting started. Logan couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body language. Richard stood at the head of the table, gesturing emphatically, his face animated. Victoria sat at the opposite end, still and composed, letting him talk. Time crawled. Logan checked his phone compulsively, though there was nothing to check. Employees walked past, shooting curious glances at the boardroom. One woman stopped and asked Logan if he was waiting for someone. "Just here for moral support," he said. She looked at him strangely, but didn't push. Inside the boardroom, Victoria finally stood. Logan leaned forward, watching as she spoke. Her hands moved deliberately, pointing to documents spread across the table. She pulled up something on the screen at the front of the room, charts, numbers, projections. Richard tried to interrupt, but Victoria kept talking, her expression firm. The board members leaned in, engaged. Some were nodding, others looked skeptical. It went on for over an hour. Logan's back started to ache from the uncomfortable chair, but he didn't move. He kept his eyes on Victoria, willing her to hold it together. Finally, she sat down. Richard stood again, his face red now, his gestures sharp and aggressive. He spoke for maybe 5 minutes, then sat down hard in his chair. The board chair, an older man with silver hair, stood and said something. Then he called for a vote. Logan's stomach dropped. This was it. The board members raised their hands one by one. Logan tried to count, but the glass distorted his view, and he couldn't tell who was voting which way. It seemed to take forever. Then it was done. The board chair said something, and the room erupted. Not in chaos, these were controlled people, but in a flurry of movement and conversation. Richard stood abruptly and stormed out of the room, his face twisted with fury. He didn't even look at Logan as he passed. Victoria remained seated, her head bowed. Logan's heart sank. She'd lost. But then one of the board members, a woman in her 60s, walked over to Victoria and extended her hand. Victoria stood, shook it, and the woman smiled. Other board members followed, shaking Victoria's hand, some patting her shoulder. Relief washed through Logan so hard he felt dizzy. She'd won. The boardroom slowly emptied, and finally, Victoria walked out. She moved toward Logan, her face unreadable, and he stood up. "Well?" he asked. Victoria stopped in front of him. 8-4. In my favor. Logan exhaled. "You did it." Yeah. Victoria's voice was flat, almost hollow. "I did it." "Then why do you look like that?" Victoria glanced back at the boardroom, then at Logan. Because I just spent 2 hours fighting to keep a job I'm not sure I even want anymore. Logan didn't know what to say to that. Come on, Victoria said. Let's get out of here. They left the tower and drove in silence. Logan expected Victoria to direct him back to his apartment, but instead, she stared out the window and said, Can we just drive for a bit? Yeah, sure. Logan drove aimlessly through the city, taking turns at random, letting the streets choose their direction. Victoria leaned her head against the window, her eyes closed, and Logan left her alone with whatever she was processing. Eventually, they ended up at a park on the edge of the city. Logan pulled into the lot and turned off the engine. You want to walk? He asked. Victoria nodded. They got out and walked along a path that wound through trees and around a small pond. The morning was cool, the air sharp and clean. A few joggers passed them, along with a man walking a dog and a woman pushing a stroller. Victoria walked slowly, her limp more pronounced now that she wasn't trying to hide it. They didn't talk. They just walked. After a while, they found a bench overlooking the water, and Victoria sat down heavily, her hand pressed to her ribs. You okay? Logan asked, sitting beside her. Physically? I'll heal. Victoria stared out at the water. Everything else? I don't know. You won, Victoria. You kept your company. I know. She turned to look at him, but sitting in that boardroom, listening to Richard tear me apart, watching those people decide whether I was worthy of the empire I built. All I could think was, why am I doing this? And what's the answer, say? Victoria laughed bitterly. I don't have one. I used to think I knew. I was proving my father right, proving everyone who doubted me wrong, building something that mattered. She paused. But, none of that feels true anymore. Logan leaned back against the bench. So what does feel true? Victoria was quiet for a long time, watching the ripples move across the pond's surface. The last week, being in your apartment, playing with Ava, eating grilled cheese at a kitchen table that wobbles. That felt true. That's just life, Logan said. Normal, boring life. Exactly. Victoria turned to face him fully. I spent a decade building power, and I forgot what it felt like to just exist, to be a person instead of a position. Her voice cracked slightly. And now I'm terrified that I'm going to lose that again. Logan understood that fear more than he wanted to admit. He'd felt it when he'd held Ava for the first time, this tiny, fragile life depending on him, and realized he had no idea what he was doing. But he'd learned that the fear never really went away. You just learned to live with it. You don't have to lose it, Logan said, but you have to choose not to. How? I don't know. That's your call to make. Logan looked at her. But I know you're not the same person who walked into my apartment a week ago. And whatever you decide to do next, that matters. Victoria nodded slowly, like she was trying to convince herself. I keep thinking about what you said, about failing not being the end. Yeah? I spent my whole life terrified of it. Failure meant I was weak, that I didn't deserve what I had. She took a shaky breath. But watching you with Ava, seeing how you show up for her every day, even when it's hard, even when you're exhausted, you fail all the time. You run out of money, you can't afford things she wants, you're stretched so thin you can barely function, but you keep going, and she loves you anyway. That's different, Logan said. She's my daughter, Sha. No, it's not different. Victoria's voice was firm now. It's the same. You're not perfect, but you're present, and that's what actually matters. Logan didn't know what to say to that. He'd never thought about it that way. Never realized that Ava didn't need him to be perfect, just there. I want to change things, Victoria said suddenly. At the company. The way we treat people. The way we measure success. She looked at Logan. I want to build something that actually matters. Not just to shareholders, but to the people doing the work. That's going to be hard. I know, but I think it's worth trying. Victoria paused. I'm going to need help, though. People I can trust. Logan raised an eyebrow. And you're looking at me? I'm offering you a job. Logan stared at her. What? A real one, not janitorial, something that uses your actual skills. Victoria's eyes were serious.
I saw your personnel file. MIT engineering degree.
Army Corps of Engineers, project management experience. You're overqualified to be pushing a mop, and we both know it. Victoria. I'm not offering this out of pity, she cut in. I'm offering it because you're smart, you're honest, and you don't bullshit me. I need people like that if I'm going to actually change things.
Logan's mind raced. A real job, better pay, stability for Ava. It was everything he'd been struggling toward for 3 years. But it was also complicated. Working for Victoria meant crossing lines,
Blurring boundaries that had been clear when he was just the janitor who'd saved her life.
I need to think about it, he said finally. Take all the time you need. Victoria stood up carefully, but the offer stands. They walked back to the car and drove to Logan's apartment.
When they got there, Victoria gathered her things, the few clothes she'd borrowed, her laptop, the files she'd spread across his living room. My building's been cleared, she said. I can go back tonight. You don't have to rush, Logan said. I know, but I should. You've done enough. Victoria zipped up her bag and looked around the apartment. I'm going to miss this place. It's a dump. It's home. She smiled. At least, it felt like one. There was a knock at the door. Logan opened it to find David Orton standing there, looking professional and unreadable as always. Miss Hale, Orton said.
Your car's ready when you are.
Victoria nodded, then turned back to Logan. Thank you for everything. I know I keep saying that, but I don't know how else to... You don't have to keep thanking me, Logan interrupted. Just don't forget what you learned here. I won't. Victoria hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged him. It was awkward. She was still injured, and Logan was caught off guard. But it was genuine. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. I'll see you soon. Yeah, you will. She left, and Logan stood in the doorway, watching as Orton led her down the stairs. Just before she disappeared from view, she looked back and waved. Logan waved back. Then she was gone. The apartment felt empty without her. Logan moved through the rooms, picking up the blankets she'd used, the mug she'd left on the coffee table. Ava's spaghetti structures were still scattered around, Victoria's marshmallow contributions still holding strong. He sat down on the couch and pulled out his phone. There was a text from Carla asking if he was picking Ava up soon. He responded that he'd be there in 20 minutes. Then he just sat there, letting the silence settle around him. Victoria had offered him a job, a real one. A chance to use his degree, to build something, to give Ava the stability she deserved. He should have said yes immediately, but he kept thinking about what it would mean, working directly for Victoria, being part of her world, navigating the complications of a relationship that had started in crisis and evolved into something he couldn't quite name. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unknown number. This is Victoria. I forgot to get your number earlier, so I had Diane track it down. Hope that's not weird. Anyway, think about the job offer. No pressure. V. Logan stared at the message, then typed back, I will. And it's a little weird, but I'll allow it. Her response came almost immediately. Generous of you. Logan smiled despite himself. He picked up Ava from daycare, and she immediately asked where Victoria was. She went back to her apartment, Logan said. Ava's face fell. Is she coming back? I don't know, Bug. But she has to. We didn't finish building the big tower. Maybe she'll visit. Promise? Logan couldn't promise that. But looking at his daughter's hopeful face, he said, I'll ask her. That seemed to satisfy Ava, at least for the moment. That night, after he'd put Ava to bed, Logan sat at the kitchen table and pulled up his bank account on his laptop. The numbers hadn't changed, still tight, still precarious. But they were manageable. He'd been managing them for 3 years. The question wasn't whether he needed the job Victoria was offering. It was whether he was ready to take it. He thought about Ava, about the future he wanted to give her, about the example he wanted to set. Then he pulled out his phone and typed a message to Victoria. I've thought about your offer. Let's talk details. When are you free? Her response came 5 minutes later. Tomorrow, lunch. I'll have Diane set it up. And Logan? Thank you. For what? For saying yes. Logan set the phone down and leaned back in his chair. He still wasn't sure if he was making the right choice, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like he was moving forward instead of just surviving, and maybe that was enough. 3 months later, Logan stood in an office on the 38th floor of the DeVos Tower, looking out at the city sprawled below. It was smaller than Victoria's office, but it had windows and a door that closed and a desk that didn't wobble. The nameplate on the door read, Logan Pierce, Director of Operations. He still wasn't entirely sure how he'd gotten here. The job interview had been intense. Victoria had made it clear she wasn't offering charity, and if he wanted the position, he'd have to earn it. So he had. He'd presented plans for streamlining inefficient processes, proposals for restructuring teams, ideas for improving employee retention. Victoria had listened to all of it, asked pointed questions, then hired him on the spot. The transition hadn't been smooth. There were people who resented him, who whispered that he'd only gotten the job because he'd saved the CEO's life. There were days when Logan wondered if they were right, if he was in over his head. But then he'd walk into a meeting and realize he knew exactly what he was talking about. Or he'd solve a problem that had been plaguing a department for months. Or Victoria would stop by his office and say, "Good work on the logistics report. Keep it up." And he'd remember why he'd said yes. The company had changed too. Victoria had made good on her promise to restructure, to prioritize people over profit margins. It wasn't perfect. There was still pushback, still resistance from executives like Richard, who'd been quietly demoted after the board vote. But it was different, better. There was a knock on Logan's door, and he turned to see Ava standing there, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Fridays were early release days at school, and Logan had worked out an arrangement where she could come to the office and do her homework in the break room until he was done for the day. "Hey, Bug," Logan said. "How was school?" "Good. We learned about fractions. They're weird." She walked into the office and looked around. "Can I draw at your desk?" "Sure, just don't mess with my files." Ava climbed into his chair and pulled out her crayons, immediately getting to work on whatever masterpiece she was creating. Logan's phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. "Meeting in 10. Conference room B. Bring the Q3 projections. On my way." He grabbed the folder from his desk, told Ava he'd be back in a bit, and headed down the hall. The conference room was already full when he arrived. Victoria sat at the head of the table, looking sharp and focused. She glanced up when Logan entered and nodded toward an empty seat. "Thanks for joining us, Logan. Let's get started." The meeting lasted 45 minutes. They discussed projections, timelines, potential obstacles. Logan presented his analysis, fielded questions, and contributed ideas. It felt natural now, being in this space, having his voice heard. When the meeting ended, Victoria hung back as everyone else filed out. "You did good in there," she said. "Thanks. I mean it. That proposal for the distribution network was solid."
Logan shrugged. "Just doing my job." Victoria smiled. "You're allowed to take credit, you know." "I'll work on that." They walked back toward Logan's office together. Through the window, they could see Ava still hunched over the desk, drawing intently. "She's gotten big," Victoria said. "Yeah, growing too fast." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I haven't seen her in a few weeks. I miss her. You should come by sometime. She asks about you constantly." "I'd like that." Victoria hesitated. "Actually, I was thinking, maybe I could take both of you to dinner this weekend, if you're free." Logan looked at her, surprised. "Like, dinner? "Yeah, nothing fancy, just, I want to spend time with you both, outside of work." She looked almost nervous. "If that's okay," Logan thought about it, about the boundaries he'd tried to maintain, the lines he'd drawn to keep things professional. But standing there, looking at Victoria, who'd become something more than his boss, more than the woman he'd pulled from a burning car, he realized those lines had already blurred beyond recognition. "Yeah," he said. "That'd be nice." Victoria's face lit up. "Good. I'll text you." She left, and Logan walked into his office. Ava looked up from her drawing. "Daddy, look! I drew us again." She held up the paper. 3 stick figures stood in front of a building that was unmistakably the tower. Logan recognized himself and Ava immediately. The third figure had long, dark hair and was holding both their hands. "That's really good, Bug." "Victoria's taller now."
Ava observed, because she's not sad anymore. Logan looked at the drawing more closely. The first time Ava had drawn Victoria, the stick figure had been hunched, small. This one stood straight, tall, smiling. "You're right," Logan said quietly. "She's not." That weekend, they met Victoria at a small Italian restaurant near Logan's apartment. Nothing fancy, like she'd promised, just checkered tablecloths and bread baskets and pasta that came in portions too big to finish. Ava talked non-stop, telling Victoria about school and her friends and the new book series she was reading. Victoria listened with genuine interest, asking questions, laughing at Ava's stories. Logan watched them and felt something settle in his chest, something that felt like peace. After dinner, they walked Ava to the park across the street. She ran ahead to the swings, and Logan and Victoria sat on a bench watching her. "Thank you for this," Victoria said. "I needed it." "Rough week?" "Ook. Just long." She leaned back against the bench. "The board's been pushing back on some of the changes I'm trying to make. Richard's still bitter, and I'm tired of fighting all the time. So stop." Victoria looked at him. "Stop fighting? Stop fighting alone." Logan nodded toward Ava, who was trying to swing high enough to touch the sky. "You've got people in your corner now. Use them." Victoria smiled. "You make it sound easy." "It's not, but it's better than the alternative." They sat in silence for a while, watching Ava play. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was cooling, autumn starting to make itself known. "I've been thinking," Victoria said eventually, "about what you said. That day at the pond. About being present mattering more than being perfect." "Yeah? I think you were right." She turned to look at him. "I spent my whole life chasing perfection, trying to prove I was good enough. And I missed everything that actually mattered along the way." "You didn't miss it," Logan said. "You just took a detour. A long one. Better late than never." Victoria laughed softly. "You always know what to say." "Not always, just sometimes." Ava ran over then, breathless and grinning. "Daddy, push me on the swings." Logan stood. "You got it, Bug." "Oh." He walked over to the swings with Ava, and Victoria followed, standing to the side and watching as Logan pushed his daughter higher and higher, her laughter ringing out across the park. And in that moment, Logan realized something. He'd spent 3 years thinking success meant providing for Ava, keeping her safe, making sure she had everything she needed. And those things mattered. But what mattered more was this, being here, being present, letting her know she was loved. That was what Victoria had been missing. And that was what she was learning. Not from him exactly, but from being part of something real, something human. When they finally left the park, Ava held both their hands, swinging between them as they walked. And Logan thought about how strange life was, how a car accident and a rainstorm and a split-second decision to stop had led to this. He'd saved Victoria's life that night on the highway. But in the months since, she'd saved something in him too. She'd reminded him that he was more than a janitor, more than a struggling single father barely keeping his head above water. That he had value beyond what he could provide, worth beyond his ability to survive. And maybe that was the real lesson in all of this. That people weren't defined by their job titles or their bank accounts or the empires they built. They were defined by the choices they made when everything else fell away, by whether they stopped to help when they could have kept driving, by whether they opened their door to someone who needed it, by whether they showed up day after day, even when it was hard. Victoria had built an empire, but she'd learned that empires meant nothing if you had no one to share them with. Logan had built a life from scraps, but he'd learned that those scraps could become something beautiful if you let the right people in. And Ava, 6 years old and wise beyond her years, had taught them both that love didn't require perfection, just presence. They walked back to Logan's car and he drove Victoria back to her building. When they pulled up, she didn't immediately get out. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Always." "Do you think people can really change? Or do they just become better at hiding who they are?" Logan thought about that, about the woman who'd humiliated him in that hallway, and the woman sitting next to him now, about the man he'd been before Ava, and the man he'd become because of her. "I think people are always changing," he said. "The question is whether they're changing into someone better or someone worse. And that's a choice you make every day." Victoria nodded slowly. "I want to choose better." "Then do it." She smiled, leaned over, and kissed him on the cheek. "Good night, Logan." "Good night." She got out of the car. And Logan watched her walk into her building, her shoulders back, her head high. Then he drove home, carried a sleeping Ava up to their apartment, and tucked her into bed. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her breathe, and thought about all the things he'd sacrificed to get here. The career he'd left behind, the future he'd imagined, the life he'd thought he wanted. And he realized he didn't regret any of it. Because this messy, imperfect, beautiful life was better than anything he could have planned. Success wasn't measured in power or wealth. It was measured in moments like this, in the people who showed up when you needed them, in the connections you built, the lives you touched, the choices you made when no one was watching. Victoria had learned that the hard way. So had Logan. But they'd learned it together, and that made all the difference.